his approval ratings are higher than they've been. There was a CBS poll very recently showing him, breaking the 50% barrier, which is normal for presidents in honeymoon phases, but not at all for Donald Trump, who's often found it difficult to get over half the population supporting him.
But it is sweeping tariffs to all imports in steel and aluminium from right across the world.
Yes, Carol, a lot of people think this beggar my neighbor policy will not end well for the global economy. But Trump voters think that once again, it's a case of, promises made, promises kept. Trump said he was going to do it, that he's standing up for American industry. And it's one of the reasons why he got a lot of blue collar workers to vote for him at the last election. So he thinks he's maintaining his promises. He's absolutely convinced that the golden age of American prosperity will return if everything is made in America and everybody buys American. And what's more, he thinks he has significant leverage over every other nation on earth, and he's going to use it. He's made that very plain.
Yeah, Alicia, we were hearing from David Hennig saying that maybe the UK might be reluctant to join the EU in retaliating against these tariffs. It is a bit of a dilemma, isn't it, for the British government? Because we know that although our exports of steel to the US are relatively small in global terms, it is going to be a blow to the British steel industry.
It is. And I think if Keir Starmer's recent actions and rhetoric around Donald Trump and his relationship with the US in general is anything to go by, I think it would be really unlikely to see any kind of retaliation or really anything that could potentially upset the so far good and positive and steady relationship that Keir Starmer feels he has built with Donald Trump in the US. And I think the trouble is if there isn't a retaliation, and we very much got a hint earlier today from Peter Mandelson, he's the new US ambassador. We got a hint from him that we shouldn't overreact if these tariffs are imposed, and obviously now they have been. So I think it is very unlikely. The trouble, though, is if there is no reaction, Keir Starmer will, of course, be accused of, being bullied by Donald Trump, being a Donald Trump sympathiser, not really standing up for Britain and for British people. So he is again finding himself in a bit of a fine line to tread here, and a really difficult situation to get right, I'd say.
Sarah, tell us a bit more about the reaction there in the US, because we know that some of those manufacturing industries and politicians, including Republicans who represent those areas, do have concerns.
Well, yes, they do. But at the same time, as you heard from the previous Republican speaker, the Republican Party is falling overwhelmingly into line with Donald Trump because they actually see that his approval ratings are higher than they've been. There was a CBS poll very recently showing him, breaking the 50% barrier, which is normal for presidents in honeymoon phases, but not at all for Donald Trump, who's often found it difficult to get over half the population supporting him. So people are liking what they're seeing. And that's why Republicans, who actually were very firm in saying that, tariffs were an idiotic policy, the Wall Street Journal said that as well, said that they were dumb, are now falling into line, especially as they can see Donald Trump coercing everybody else. And it's not just these steel and aluminium tariffs that have been announced. Trump was also saying that if anybody elsewhere charges tariffs on American goods going into their country that are higher than coming back in the other direction, then he will up them. And that's a threat, for example, to the European car industry, particularly the Germans, who, as I understand it, imposed 10% tariffs on imports of American cars, whereas the vice versa for imports of European cars in America is only 2.5%. So Trump is thinking there, at least, he's going to level the playing field. And although everybody's slightly holding on to their hats in anxiety to see, whether or not this inflationary process is going to work its way through and start hitting consumers in the pocket, on the face of it, this kind of tough talk sounds exactly like what Donald Trump was saying about putting America first.
Yeah, very much the MAGA philosophy being put into practice there. Alicia, as we heard there, in particular, the US are worried about some of the imports that the US are currently taking from the EU. The Times is reporting in the morning that if the EU imposes counter tariffs, that the UK wouldn't go along with it. And although, I mean, if you stand back, that makes sense. But on the other hand, it is part of this big dilemma, isn't it? Keir Starmer saying he doesn't have to choose between the EU and the US. Well, he just might have to on this.
Absolutely. And I think moments like this really highlight the fact that we are actually just a really small island nation, however wealthy, however powerful however many ways. When it comes down to issues like this, we are actually pretty small in the globe. And I think the idea that the Republicans are pushing in the US with this particularly and tariffs is this idea that they can be totally self-sufficient in the US. They don't really need to import anything. That seems to be the dream for them. And the sad truth is fine. They may not be able to be totally self-sufficient, but they have a lot better shot at it than we do, purely because of the size of their nation and the resources they have access to. So we are slightly in a bit of a difficult situation. We're kind of standing alone. We're not with Europe anymore, so we don't even really have that to fall back on. We are pretty alone in this. So Keir Starmer does have to tread very, very carefully. And I think the leading up to this, the idea that maybe we would be exempt from these tariffs or exempt from any of Trump's kind of punishments because we're no longer in the EU, I think was very optimistic. And I think we now know that Trump actually doesn't really work like that, and that he is pretty ruthless and happy to do whatever it is that will benefit, well, what he thinks will benefit his country and his people the most.
Yeah, and Sarah, this does seem to be slightly different. I mean, Donald Trump was making it clear, as Alicia referred to there, that this applies to all steel and aluminium imports, wherever they come from. And this appears to be a slightly different approach from that initial threat, wasn't there, of tariffs against Canada and Mexico, which seemed to be, which were very swiftly rescinded when those two countries both agreed to bolster their borders. It doesn't look as though there's any deals to be done to get out of these ones.
No, and actually the countries that will suffer most are countries, America's closest neighbors, certainly Canada, which imports, its exports are going to be hit by this, and also Brazil's, Mexico's, etc., are going to be hit. But it is also a way of getting at China, because China produces a lot of global steel and at the moment has a glut. So this is going to affect them as well. And I think, anyone who hopes to escape it, Donald Trump's rather hectoring attitude towards foreign policy, the economy, the whole his attitude towards allies. He mentioned friends and foes, and that's absolutely right. He almost doesn't really distinguish between friend or foe, or if anything, he's slightly softer on foes, who he's a bit more afraid of maybe. But it's all about, well, what's in it for America? And if he can't satisfy himself that something is in America's interest, he's not going to have any truck with it. And there are so many examples of this. I think that Keir Starmer has established a relatively good relationship with Trump. I don't think that Trump is looking for any kind of punishment beatings towards Britain. But there's also no escaping the logic of you're with us or against us when it comes to Trump. It's very difficult to finesse this.